Hey, everybody. Welcome in. It is the Houtopia Football Podcast. It is the first episode of this week. The Texans, we're into that period of time between off-season activities, the early ones, and training camp, but no shortage of things to talk about as we welcome you in, whether you're listening on the Audacy app or whether you are listening wherever it is you get your podcast from. We appreciate you tuning in. It is the Houtopia Football Podcast. I'm Sean Pendergast, one half of Payne and Pendergast on Sports Radio 610, joined as always by my good friend, the Hall of Famer, and our senior columnist at sportsradio610.com, John McClain. John, how are we doing today, man?
I'm doing great, and I hope since you got 3 kids, you had a great Father's Day.
I did. I had a great Father's Day. I get to spend time with one of them, the one that lives here, Sammy Sickham, right? Proud Baylor alum. Yeah, he went out to lunch with me and my wife and my in-laws. So we had a nice day. And then he came over and sat in my chair, and we watched the Astros lose on this wall behind us right over here. So
yeah, I noticed you strategically have the wall now that you didn't have it before.
Yeah. I know
Is
you
there
like
any
it.
reason for that?
I think it's a good-looking background more than anything else. You know, I think it's just it adds a little flavor to the background. Amy put up before she leaves, I kick her out of the apartment when it's time to do the podcast, but she's kind enough to put it on YouTube channels that just show beaches for 12 hours at a time. You know,
I think it looks great. I thought you might have put it up to torture me.
No, it's more for the benefit, the eye candy of our YouTube channel that is now a burgeoning thing for us here. Oh no, you know, I don't like to tease you like that, John. You know that. Come on now.
Well, I have a great background, of course. I had a friend of mine I do a Zoom with every week, and they said I look like I'm in a sauna. And then they came up with another one that said, you look like you're in the basement where we used to go to party with our girlfriends in middle school.
You do, John. You look like every parent's basement from 1973. That is true.
I'm in a den, and I've tried to get Carol to let me put some pictures on this wall, even if it's just of our cat Shadow, but she likes it being like this. I guess I could put one of those backgrounds in there, but
yeah,
I get you get comments because yours is great. I get comments because mine's bad.
That's funny. And it serves for a little bit of humor. And happy Father's Day to you. You are a father to Shadow and how many other pets?
That's it. Just Shadow.
Okay. Shadow keeps you busy though, huh?
And he gave me a present. It was very nice.
Oh, that's nice. What did he give you?
2 cards and a pack of jelly beans, which I did not eat.
Attaboy.
But it was a thought that counts.
Of course. Good job, Shadow. All right, John, let's get right down to things here. We've got Seth and I interviewed Nick Caserio, Texans GM, on Friday on Payne and Pendergast. You can find that interview same way you can find this podcast on the Audacy app, wherever it is you get your podcasts. And he spent about 45 minutes in studio with us, John. Was really good. Good candor, I thought, from Nick. He seems to have a different energy about him now that D'Amico's in the building there, and things seem to be trending in the right direction with this team.
I think you guys always get the best of Caserio. You know, when he's standing in front of a news conference, he talks a lot, 90 miles an hour, and you have to sift through the nuggets if he gives any, because he's so careful. Because usually when he talks to us, the draft's coming up, the season's coming up, he's much more relaxed with y'all. I think it's because you talk to him about things other than football. But getting him to come into the studio that long, that was a real coup. So congratulations, because he's always interesting and much more informative with you and Seth than he is Seth when he does the news conference.
Yeah, well, he had a few little things I thought in here. I mean, we need to, even with the stuff he comes on with us sometimes, you got to sift through it a little bit. But he was pretty forthcoming about a few things. I'm going to touch on some of them here. We won't get to all of them. Obviously, if you want to listen to the entire interview again, you can get it on the Audacy app or sportsradio610.com. We're going to have some of the things that John and I learned from the offseason program coming up in just a little bit as well, and a little FORREAL or FUGAZI later on in the program. So stay tuned for that. But as far as some things, John, we talked about the rookies with him, and the only ones I brought up by name were Will Anderson and C.J. Stroud. And even when Seth tried to get some other ones singled out, he wouldn't do it But it was shortly after Seth had asked that question after Nick had voluntarily singled out Henry To'oTo'o, the linebacker out of Alabama. So he answered our questions about Will. We'll talk about that in a second. Answered questions about CJ Stroud. And while he was answering, I believe, one of the questions about Will, he veered into about a minute on how quickly Henry To'oTo'o, the linebacker from Alabama, is picking things up. I thought that was significant from Caserio.
I watched almost every Alabama game the last 2 years. I wanted to see Bill O'Brien and what he was going to do coaching the Crimson Tide. And then I fell in love with Bryce Young because he was on his way to the Heisman. And every time I was watching, I kept hearing To'oTo'o, and I'm thinking, how do you spell To'oTo'o? And so I finally looked it up, and I thought, man, I hope I don't have to type that name all the time, much less pronounce it. And then when they drafted him, I thought they got a steal when they did. And for Caserio to single somebody out, which is very unusual, he has that Patriot mentality. You ask about a player, he talks about a position. He's much more forthcoming with you guys, and I thought he was terrific. And there's a good chance Texans could be playing 2 Alabama linebackers quite a bit.
Yep, no doubt about that. Well, 2 Alabama linebackers, and then whatever we're calling Will Anderson. It's a 9 technique or a defensive end. I mean, there could be 3 young Alabama players out there, including Will Anderson, which brings us to the next takeaway from the Nick Caserio interview with Seth and I on Sports Radio 610. Obviously loves Will Anderson, said that they actually need to dial him back sometimes in these off-season workouts because he's so intense and he plays with his hair on fire. But he was pretty revealing with how they envision using him. He said they've been moving him from the right side to the left side, which shows you that he's picking things up pretty quickly. His acumen is good. And he said they're also toying with the idea of playing him inside on passing downs just to get their best 4 pass rushers out there. So there appears to be already, I mean, we knew they had some sort of plan in place when they drafted him. Anderson had said that in some pre-draft interviews about, hey, if you go to the Texans, what are they talking about with you? But I thought Nick was pretty forthcoming with how he's been shuffled around and used in these early offseason workouts.
D'Amico Ryans told us he's a defensive end, and I think it'd be stupid to play him inside because then you're going to get beat on by the big guys, and you're going to get doubled by a guard and a center, where if they have him on the edge, he'd be going against an end unless he's so good. They put a tight end over there to help, which could happen a lot because he's a terrific pass rusher. It's obvious D'Amico and Caserio love the guy, and he's going to start from day one. It's interesting the way they approach it, so careful with Stroud, but they admit how much they love Anderson, how impressive he's been, how he picks up everything. I can't wait to see him. He and Bijan Robinson are the favorites to win Defensive and Offensive Rookie of the Year. I've seen some people pick Bryce Young, but it's rare for a rookie quarterback to play well enough to be voted Offensive Rookie of the Year. I can't wait to see Will Anderson because I've seen most of his games in the last 2 years. And when he won the Rotary Lombardi Award, I was up on the dais with Mattress Mac because Mac's the one that presented it to him. And I had to make a presentation. And I thought at the time, this was the first week in December. And I thought, man, oh man, what it would be like if the Texans got a pass rusher like him because he's the best in the draft. And I thought, but there's no way they're going to bypass a quarterback for him because of that desperate need. And of course, when they trade up, I was shocked in a great way because I thought back to watching him play all those games the last 2 years. I can't wait to see Will Anderson on the field.
Yeah, same here. I'm really excited. I'm excited for him. I'm excited for the player, but he seems like he's going to be a fun guy to cover for us as well. Just a really great personality too with Will Anderson. All right, a couple more takeaways from the Caserio interview on Sports Radio 610 with me and Seth Payne last week. John, it sounds like that Nick, we talked about, I asked him about the extensions they've given out so far this year, that they're all in the trenches, 2 Shaq Mason, Laramie Tunsil, and then the Malik Collins extension last week. And Nick said, well, our belief is to build from the inside out. So that's not a coincidence. That's the focal point for Caserio. He did mention that there are other players who are in contract years and that they're not married to any sort of calendar as far as when an extension could come down, including in season, which is a big departure from regimes past with the Texans, which would use week 1 as sort of a a barrier, as sort of an endpoint to any sort of negotiations. So I would just the tone that he took, John, in that answer. I feel like there's at least one or two more of these coming down, these extensions for veteran guys, possibly.
Well, the one they'd love to get is Titus Howard, but they can't pay 2 offensive tackles great money. You just can't do it. And Titus has shown he can play left tackle and he can play guard. So I would imagine Titus Howard's headed for a big payday if he stays healthy and plays the way he's capable, because I just don't see them earmarking that kind of money for a right tackle when you've made Laramie Tunsil highest paid offensive lineman in NFL history. Yeah. And when we look on their defense, next year, I think their biggest needs are going to be a guy to play next to Malik Collins who can rush the quarterback, which Malik doesn't do, and somebody. And actually, Grenard and Hughes on the last year of their contracts, Jerry's going to be 35 years old. And you don't see many 36-year-old defensive ends because this could be it for him. And Grenard, he hadn't been able to stay healthy. If he can stay healthy here, he's capable of double digits. And then you could, because Will Anderson is cheap against the cap, you could re-sign Grenard. But they still need, to me, Grenard or another end, and definitely a defensive tackle. And I'm guessing you'll agree with me, their biggest need on offense right now is still a big play receiver who can stretch the defense.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. That's the biggest need right now, is a big play receiver. We'll see. It's going to be a spread the wealth thing kind of this year for the Texans offensively for sure. The last thing, John, from the Caserio interview, then we'll get to things that we learned, a few things we learned from the offseason program. He called Jay Watt a mother effer. His exact words. He thankfully didn't use the full-on F word because of the FCC governance, but he said he was describing. I asked him, would J.J. Watt going in the Ring of Honor, give me a New England perspective on J.J. Watt, preparing for him, what that was like. And of course, he talked about how he can wreck a game. He's amazing. And he said the biggest thing that he could do, the most underrated thing that he could do, was his ability to track down plays from the backside, running plays, the ability to come, like, say, from the left and tackle from the left side of the defensive line and tackle a running back who's running away from that side of the line, because he was so quick and he was able to beat guys. He said, man, there was a game we played in Houston, New England, and he said we had this big plan to stop J.J. Watt, and we run away from him, and then the mother effer gets us in the backfield in a 2nd and 13 all of a sudden. And he talked to John about the conversation that he and J.J. had when the Texans let J.J. go so he could leave in free agency to eventually go to Arizona. He said he and J.J. had a really, really good conversation in those early weeks of the Caserio era. There's tremendous respect from Nick Caserio for J.J. Watt.
And I'm guessing he's too nice to point out they did a better job against Watt than any team in the league. The Patriots are notorious for targeting one guy. Mm-hmm. There's one guy on defense or one guy on offense besides the quarterback. We've got to take him out and neutralize him. And they did a tremendous job. So Nick watched a whole lot of tape because Nick was part of a coaching staff. He was up in the booth helping Josh McDaniels. And so he would have watched a lot of tape of JJ. So he knew how great JJ could be. And I'd love to know the secret of what they did, but he's never going to reveal that. Great respect. Everybody has great respect for Watt. And it's going to be so exciting to see his jersey up in the rafters when the Steelers are in town.
Yeah, that'll be great. October the 1st, week 4 is when that's happening. So you can get that full Nick Caserio interview on sportsradio610.com and or the Audacy app on the Payne and Pendergast podcast. John, let's shift gears. The offseason program as a whole, you're going to have a piece going up on sportsradio610.com with 10 things that you learned from the Texans offseason program. Do you care to go Costco here and give us some samples of what we could see in that piece there?
Sure. I do have one up on Monday morning about what a disaster the Astros have become.
We'll get to them, I promise. Yeah.
Having 2 4-game losing streaks in 13 days.
Yeah.
And the thing about the 10, I'm going to do one this week in which 10 that we learned from off-season program, and then I'm going to do one later as training camp gets closer, saying 10 things they need to accomplish in training camp and preseason. Yeah. And one of the things that stands out to me is the most important player on the team, C.J. Stroud. is how hard he works. He's a football fanatic.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, maybe they just don't talk about this, but other quarterbacks do it, that he talks to the defensive players and the defensive coaches to ask questions, as well as his teammates on offense. And of course, Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, and Rod Johnson, the quarterback's coach. So his eagerness to learn and devote so much time to learning Slowick's system, that's the thing that has stood out to me, and listening to players praise him and his knowledge and that eagerness.
The cross sport comparison that I made to CJ Stroud, and maybe the timeliness of this one isn't great considering how poorly the Astros are playing, although this guy had a good game yesterday, I suppose. He reminds me a lot of Alex Bregman, in that, Bregman is the guy, John, that when they won the World Series a few years, not last year, but a few years ago, the big joke was that Alex Bregman, they got done doing all the champagne and they all said Alex Bregman was in a batting cage the next day. Bregman is kind of the guy who's sort of the baseball gym rat, kind of the junkie, about baseball. And I get that same vibe off of CJ Stroud. Like, CJ Stroud strikes me as a guy who, they win the Super Bowl, they get off of the floats, and then the next day he's doing footwork drills somewhere to get ready for the next season.
Yeah, everybody's fired up about Stroud. He's going to have his ups and downs, and he's going to make a lot of mistakes. Whereas Will Anderson, his mistakes, he's going to make them, but they're not going to be as noticeable as a quarterback's will. So those top two picks, they could both be outstanding. Maybe not the first year. Remember, JJ wasn't outstanding as a rookie. He had, I think, 5.5 sacks.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the playoff victory over Cincinnati when the J.J. Watt phenomenon was born.
That's true. You got any other nuggets you want to give the people, John, that they might find in that article?
Yeah, a lot of people worried about Laramie Tunsil missing all that time again. But watching him out there, and he's like putting your foot in a comfortable house shoe. He just slips right in, and you doesn't miss a beat. Now, he's a great pass protector. He's not a great run blocker. I think I can't figure out how this is going to work. Stroud did not have the left side of the line, and he may not add his center because Quisenberry's not going to be starting. Eventually, it's going to be Juice Scruggs. So the center, left guard, and left tackle weren't there at all together starting. But they're going to, we don't know when Kenyon Green's coming back. But Tunsil, he's the best player on the team. He's the safest bet that anybody can have about a player who's going to do well. And the other one was Derek Stingley Jr. A lot of people around the country said, oh, that guy's not as good as Sauce Gardner, and he wasn't, even though he was taken ahead of him. But he's going to be used differently. And he looks like he's hit a weight program and he's gotten stout. And I was watching him one time run down the sideline, man coverage. I can't remember which receiver it was, but it was a fast one. And he stuck with him in the pass at the last minute. He leaped and he knocked the ball away. And his teammates came over and patted him on the back because they know that's why he was drafted. He looks because he's healthy and he's put on weight, which makes him stronger. He looks like a big-time player.
Yeah, knock on wood with that health thing with Derek Stingley Jr. for sure. All right, so John, we'll be able to see that article up on sportsradio610.com. They want to get the other 7 or 8 things that you learned from the Texans offseason program. That'll be going up this week?
Yes, it will.
All right, good stuff. We're looking forward to that for sure. All right, before we get to some for real or fugazis, let's mix in some Astros talk here. As John just mentioned, as we record this, they're in the midst of their second 4-game losing streak in the last 2 weeks. And they had a real opportunity to make some headway in the AL West, John. With the Rangers have not had a great week either. And the Astros actually find themselves further behind the Rangers than they were when this stretch of poor Rangers baseball started recently. In fact, the Astros, for the first time in a long time, find them at this juncture in the season, find themselves in 3rd place in the AL West.
Now that we're on YouTube, I can show what I think about them without saying.
I was wondering what you were doing.
I'm holding my nose because
like
they stink. I was wondering when you were going to ask what I was doing.
I was looking down at my paper and I looked up. I'm like, does John have a bloody nose? Like, well, I thought maybe you had a nosebleed or something. Was John gouging away on there and he has a bloody nose now? So, yeah.
The way they're blowing leads, yes, they have injuries. I detail all their injuries in that column on sportsradio610.com. But that's not the problem. Because blowing the lead like that, and and getting swept by the Reds, even though the Reds are red hot, it's inexcusable because their best players are not producing. You look at the bullpen. Rafael Montero's been terrible. Ryan Stanek's been terrible. They were terrific last year.
Yeah.
Ryan Presley had given up runs in 3 games in a row, cost Fromber and Christian Javier great outings, and he did come back against the Reds and pitch a good inning. Phil Maton has been their best reliever, and he got shelled by the Reds, but he bounced back with a good inning on Sunday. And then looking at the hitters, all these Jose Abreu defenders, it's laughable because he has a couple of good weeks, but overall he's still been a big disappointment. And he has not generated any consistency. He's awful on Sunday. Jeremy Pena is not the player he was at the end of last year when he was MVP of the ALCS and the World Series. Bregman is about on the pace he had last year for home runs and RBIs, but less on his average. And Kyle Tucker last year, 30 homers, 107 RBIs, hit 257. He's way under the pace of both of those, but he's hitting 285, and his on-base percentage is up. But and Altuve's only played 20 games.
Yeah.
And some things I don't understand that Dusty Baker does. Yainer Diaz has 4 hits last week, not playing the next day. Altuve, 4 hits, not playing the next day. Okay, for a guy like Diaz who needs confidence, and I know you tweeted this, and I did too, that kid's got to be in the lineup. He's red hot. You got him and Corey Julks, and even Jake Myers and Chas McCormick, and especially Mauricio Dubon. Those guys are doing as well as they can do. I don't blame J.P. France, Brandon Belak, or Ronel Blanco. They wouldn't even be in the rotation if it wasn't for the injuries. But the players who have been good have to be good again consistently. It's their worst record for 72 games since 2016, last time they didn't make the playoffs. And do you know the last time the Rangers had a record better than this and what they did and what year that was?
The last time they had a record better than this, 2016. They won the division that year.
Yeah. They had a 70, they played 71 games.
Yep.
And the last time they had a better record was 16 when they won the division while the Astros were watching on big flat screen TV.
Yeah.
So,
like that one.
I don't know. The Rangers are, they got within 3.5, stunk it up against the Reds. 5.5. The Angels are ahead of them. The Mariners are 3 games behind. At this point, Sean, all we can say for sure is they're not going to finish in last place in the AL West.
No, that's impossible. Yeah, no, they could, John, they could put you and I as the double play combination. They're still going to finish ahead of the A's. All right, I'm about to post this. We're going to do some for real or Fugazi's rapid fire style in a second. But John, I just want to get your quick answer to the question I'm about to put up on Twitter on a Pender poll for Astro fans. Who do you most blame for the team's slow start? The 4 choices: the players, Cranebag, interim GM, Dusty Baker, Dana Brown.
The players. Dana Brown didn't get here quick enough to get any blame. It's the players because of the reasons I just gave. Their best players who are healthy are not producing the way they have.
Yep, agreed. I'm with you. To me, it's players. I think there's blame to go around for everybody. Yes, least of all Dana Brown. Like Dana Brown's going to spend more time fixing the problems that Cranebag, interim GM, created this year than actually being able to go out and forge his own path with this team. So
one of the things that the Braves did when he was there, they give long-term contracts for a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
They do things that the Astros don't do. I wonder, Kyle Tucker's hitting 285 compared to 257 last year, and even though he's not on a pace for 30 homers and 107 RBIs, I wondered if they had paid him the extra $2.5 million to avoid arbitration because he came in, he was unhappy. Would he be better? But I'm guessing no. I'd love to see what Tucker could do all the time, hitting behind Alvarez, and maybe put Pena behind him and dump Abreu. They have a great record when Pena bats 2, but they're not batting him 2 anymore.
Yeah, I don't understand. And Bregman's a great cleanup hitter. I was saying when Altuve was out earlier in the year, I'm like, man, they just need to get Altuve back, get Payne in the 2, Bregman in the 4, where everybody's comfortable, and obviously Altuve leading off. And Dusty did that for a little while. Both guys were hitting, and then he starts moving them around. Dusty might be second on the list, honestly, the way these lineups have been. All right, so I just put that up on Twitter, and that poll, who's most to blame for the Astros' slow start? All right, John, you ready for a few rapid fire for real or Fugazis?
Always.
Always ready. Okay, for those of you who are new to the pod, just tuning in, we appreciate you. First, A, tell a friend. B, this is called For Real or Fugazi. We do this generally on Mondays. I'll take 5 or 6 topics, just quick one-hit sentences. I'll read them as if they are fact. If John agrees with them as if they are fact, he will say for real. If he disagrees with them, he thinks I'm way off, he thinks I'm out of my tree, John will say
Fugazi.
Fugazi. It's Italian for counterfeit. All right, John. So let's rock and roll here. Let's start with a couple Texans ones. The biggest data point for CJ Stroud in the preseason, as far as evaluating him, will be the combined practices with Miami and the New Orleans Saints. For real or Fugazi?
For real. He's going to have 4 practices against them. And, of course, he'll wear a red jersey, and he can't be touched. But his receivers are going to be covered. The linemen are going to be rushing him. They won't hit him. And it'll be a great test for him. And then, of course, he'll get in at least 2 of the games, maybe 3. But I can't wait to see him in those joint practices.
I can't either. That's going to be fun. We haven't had those, John, in about 4 years, right?
No, Cully and Lovie Smith didn't want to do them. It's, Nick Caserio did them every year in New England, but they leave it up to the head coach, and D'Amico's all for it.
Yep. All right, next one, sticking with the Texans. 2023 is a make or break season for wide receiver Nico Collins. For real or Fugazi?
For real, again. He's been there 2 years. He's been hurt too much. Remember, he didn't play his last year at Michigan. He's a 3rd-round pick. He's just showed enough to be so enticing. His size, his speed, his acrobatic catches in camp last year, but he just couldn't stay healthy. And they're going to address wide receiver next year more than they did this year when they drafted 2.
It's a huge year for Nico Collins. He's got to prove he can stay on the field more than anything else. He's officially injury prone, John. It's because it's not just been one injury. It's been 3 or 4 different ones that have kept him off of the field. So he is officially, according to Dr. Pendergast, injury prone. All right, next one,
He's
John.
got a chance to make a lot of money. If he stays healthy and plays well, he'll get an extension before the last year of his contract.
I agree. All right, next one, John. There was a story that came out over the weekend that Aaron Rodgers nixed a possible trade to the New England Patriots in the offseason. Of course, he wound up with the Jets. For real or Fugazi, Aaron Rodgers would have been better off going to the New England Patriots than the New York Jets.
Fugazi. Aaron Rodgers, idiosyncrasies, and Bill Belichick. Can you imagine if Belichick had Rodgers and DeAndre Hopkins?
Oh, yes.
And so Rodgers said he wanted to go to the Jets all along.
Yeah.
And that story may be true. It would have meant they'd given up on Mac Jones, because Rodgers has said in the past, before he went into the darkness, that he wanted to play a lot of more years. Mm-hmm. And then because he was unhappy the last 2 years with the Packers, he wouldn't say anything except that year. So I expect if he plays well for the Jets, he's going to keep playing as long as he plays well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. All right, sticking with the theme of Green Bay, I guess. Jordan Love recently said in an interview that the sky is the limit for Green Bay's offense this year. John, for real or Fugazi, the Green Bay Packers in the first year post Aaron Rodgers will finish in the upper half of the league in scoring. For real or Fugazi?
Fugazi. They just gave up a quarterback's one of the all-time best. I'll see some people say greatest ever, and I want to throw up. But he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. And Jordan Love, they've been so lucky. Going back to the Brett Favre trade, it was initiated by Ron Wolf, the GM, and then with no interest in a quarterback, and Aaron Rodgers was there, general manager Ted Thompson took him, and he watched for 3 years. Those were 2 tremendous decisions. They got to suffer a little bit. The Texans have suffered a long time over quarterbacks for one reason or another. Yeah. It's time the Packers suffered, and it might not be Jordan Love's fault, but I don't see their offense being that that prolific that they're going to rank that high in points.
I'm with you on that one. I think that's a fugazi as well. All right, two more, John. Let's do an Astros one here. The Major League Baseball All-Star teams will be named by the end of the month. For real or fugazi, Framber Valdez will be the lone All-Star game representative for the Houston Astros.
Let me think one quick. I think that's for real.
Yeah.
Unless Kyle Tucker starts hitting some home runs and RBIs, his average is good. But there's so many good outfielders.
Yeah.
You know, I look at the Rangers. I look at a lot of teams. I read every box score every night. And all these teams have guys with 300 hitters and double-digit home runs. And some teams have 4 or 5. And the Astros just struggling at the plate. Lack of consistency. You know, Bregman been in a slump till he got 3 hits against the Reds in the last game, and he's been up and down. But anyway, I think now you can research this. What is the fewest number of All-Star selections the year after a team wins the World Series?
It's a great question. I don't know. That feels like one we could throw to one of those stats websites and maybe they'll spit it back out to us. That's a great question because every team's got to have at least one. But usually just one, that designation is reserved for teams that aren't very good, as you point out. Now, if Yordan Alvarez were healthy, he would clearly be going to the All-Star game. And he may get voted in. You know, he was among the top 3 in the fan voting for outfielders at the first release of the voting, the initial wave of voting tabulations. He was 3rd among outfielders behind Judge and Trout. Because Ohtani is listed as a DH on the ballot, and Yordan's an outfielder on the ballot. So the top 6 outfielders will go to that run. They do that runoff now, you know, John, where they take the top 2 at every position, top 6 in the outfield. And Altuve is second at second base right now, but he's way behind Marcus Semien, who's probably going to win the runoff against him.
Well, first of all, if Alvarez is healthy, he'll be there, even if he just comes back for a week before the selections are made.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't get voted in, you know, he's going to get selected. Yeah. And I wish Alvarez were healthy and would compete in the home run derby.
Yeah, that's never
love
happened.
To see what he could do.
Yeah.
Ronald Acuña's hit like 5 or 6 home runs at 460 feet.
Yeah.
Boy, I'd love to see those guys together. And I've never seen a good explanation of why he doesn't do it. But don't you know Major League Baseball would love to have him in there?
I would predict he will never do the home run derby because of how injury prone he is. You know, if he got an oblique issue, there's no way he'd do it this year. Even if he were healthy, there's no way he'd do it this year, coming off a 4-week of oblique. The one good thing about Alvarez, well, many good things about Alvarez, but within the context of this conversation and the injuries, the one thing I'm not concerned about, as soon as it's time for him to play again, I don't even know that he needs time in Sugarland. He's a guy who can pick up a bat and just start hitting, you know, after not hitting for a month, right?
They'd have to bring in some more stands. They set the all-time record with
they would.
Altuve.
Dude.
Have to bring or jack up the prices. They'd be scalping them.
Yep.
You know, the injury that he has, you got to be so careful because you can strain it again.
Yes.
And it'd be worse. It's almost like when he's 100%, they got to wait another week.
Yep.
Especially the guy that swings as hard as he
Exactly. All right, last one, John. When Jake Myers made the circus catch in the outfield to preserve Hunter Brown's win last week, Hunter Brown said he's treating Jake Myers to the butter cake at Mastros. For real or fugazi, John, the Mastros butter cake is the best dessert in the city of Houston.
Well, I've only been able to eat at Mastros once because I can't afford it. But since it's Tillman Fertitta's restaurant, I'll say that's for real.
Yeah, it's really good. Amy and I went there. We won a weekend at the Post Oak at the Texans season premiere event the Texans had last year. We won one of the raffles we won a 2-night stay at the Post Oak, Tillman Fertitta's hotel. So we kind of celebrated our anniversary 2 months later, and we went to Mastros the night we were there. I'm same as you. That's the second time I've been. I think it's the first time I've ever been where I've actually been the one paying. You know, usually I try to piggyback Wallace Marsh when he goes to Mastros. That's my methodology. They have an off-the-menu version of the butter cake that has blueberry. It's like a blueberry butter cake with a big scoop of ice cream on top of it.
You're killing me.
It's
killing me.
Good, John. So good. Yeah,
God.
it's delish. All right, John, what do you got going on your various platforms?
I have a column on sportsradio610.com on the Astros. I have a Houtopia football podcast with Sean Pendergast, who I'm on the air with every Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock. And I'll have 10 things we learned about the Texans in the Offseason Program.
John, good stuff as always. I enjoyed this very much.
Sean, I always do. Thank you very much. And I'm glad that you were able to celebrate Father's Day with Slinging Sammy.
Yeah, at least one of my three. The other two FaceTime me, so it's all good. Big thanks to James Jackson, who does a great job getting this podcast out to each and every one of you. If you are just finding this podcast and you want to make sure, hey, I like these guys. I like these Sean and John guys. I like them. And they're informative and they're entertaining and they're funny. And I like the Texans. Well, just hit subscribe and then you don't have to do anything. It just shows right up wherever it is you listen to your podcast. Give us a 5-star review if you think we deserve it as well. But yeah, download this podcast wherever it is you get it. Season's going to be here before we know it, but we're going to keep things going even during the off season with 2 episodes a week. Mailbag episode coming up later this week. Email your questions in houmailbag@gmail.com, houmailbag@gmail.com. So we'll see you in a couple days for that episode. For John McClain and for our producer, James, we are done. We are out of time. I'm Sean Pendergast. We'll see all of y'all later on this week on the Houtopia Football Podcast. Thanks, everybody.